Welcome back to the California Conversation. I'm Tess Abraham. Now, if you've been keeping up with the headlines about California, you may have seen that it's being reported that crime rates across California are down, and that it's even being said by people like our own governor that it is much safer here in California than it is in Republican-led states like Tennessee or Arkansas. So, is that true? Does that match up with your personal experience of what it's like to live in major cities across California? And is California much safer under the governance of a leader like Gavin Newsom, opposed to a Republican or more conservative governor? I am breaking it all down for you today so that you are armed and equipped with the facts. But before we get started, make sure to like this video, subscribe to this channel if you haven't already, and ring that notification bell so that you stay up to date on all things California politics. And if you want more information regarding sources that are cited in compiling today's episode, then you should check out my corresponding article on my website, which is linked below. Okay, so first let's start by looking at some of the claims that have been made recently. And the person who has been making these claims mostly, like I mentioned, has been Governor Newsom. So he's been tweeting a lot on X, or I guess posting on X. You don't really tweet anymore. He's been posting a lot on X about California's crime rates in comparison to other states across the nation. And so some of the claims that he's making are saying that states like Louisiana, Mississippi, these states that are governed by Republicans as opposed to Democrats or liberals, have homicide rates that are nearly 4 times higher than California's. He also points to a myriad of other red states, Alabama, Tennessee, Arkansas, Missouri, and he says that those homicide rates are again double or more than California's. Just listen to him talk about this topic at a recent press conference that he called about crime in California.
If he is to invest in crime suppression, I hope the President of the United States would look at the facts. Just consider Speaker Johnson's state and district. Just look at the murder rate that's nearly 4 times higher than California's. In Louisiana, this Speaker Johnson, 4x higher. I'm just offering, again, you've not seen this on Fox News, so President may not be familiar with these facts. So I want to present some facts to the President of the United States, and imagine this is alarming to the President to learn these facts, particularly Speaker Johnson, who's been such a strong partner and ally in these efforts. So the carnage in Louisiana is well defined.
Now, just why is Governor Newsom talking so much about this topic? It might seem random, but it is actually in response to President Trump's deployment of the National Guard. So as you remember, when there were protests in Los Angeles about federal immigration actions or protests against ICE out of California, as it was called, then President Trump deployed the National Guard to come in and help calm down the protests because they were turning violent, and it seemed like it was a pivotal moment that the president needed to act, or else they could erupt. I have a whole episode on it. I think I have several episodes on it that you can check out to see what happened there. But basically, Gavin Newsom is slamming President Trump for having deployed the National Guard in California, and so he's comparing California's crime rates to other states. So essentially, Gavin Newsom is responding to those and saying, well, look, if you really care about crime, if you really think that California is crime-ridden, then why don't you care about these states that have higher crime rates than we do? Why don't you look at something like homicide? And if you look at these states that you aren't even sending the National Guard into, why don't you care that their homicide rates are double what ours are? That's the crux of his argument. So ultimately, the point that Gavin Newsom and really others in our government across California try to make consistently is that there is a gap between public perception and reality of crime in California. They say it's public perception that California is crime-ridden, but the data or the facts prove out that California is no worse than other large states across the country. And this is important because this isn't just about being right or being honest, although those things are very important as well. But really, the implications of these claims are to say, how should a state or how should cities or how should places across the country be governed? Because if California is genuinely safer than other places, then we should look at the model of governance in California and apply it to other places with higher crime rates. And so what Newsom is implying is he is saying that you, President Trump or other conservatives, prefer these tough on crime approaches. You prefer approaches that maybe we don't take in California, but they don't work. If you look at these other states, they have higher homicide rates. And so really what you're saying to be true about policy isn't true because it's not actually flushing out. And so here in California, the model that we are taking is working. And so then we should apply that to the country. Now, how do you think he's going to apply that to the country? Well, it might be coming up in 2028, but that is a story for another day. All of that to say, Newsom wants to portray California really as a good model, showing that he has cracked down on crime, that crime has reduced, and that there's nothing wrong with the policies that he has put in place. So we need to answer today, should the rest of the country adopt California's approach to handling crime? And the first step that we need to take in answering that question is by actually digging into the data, because a lot of this conversation revolves around crime statistics. We are going to focus in on homicide rates because that is what Governor Newsom has focused in on, and we're going to compare California's homicide rates to the other states that he has called out. And I just want to mention that I will be using the CDC's statistics when it comes to homicide rates because that is what Governor Newsom uses when he cites all of these things. You can do one of two things. You can do FBI statistics or you can do the CDC. Now, FBI statistics have been slammed because they largely rely on self-reporting. And so California has been criticized in the past by conservatives to say that largely crimes are underreported. I mean, half the time cops don't even show up when a crime is called in because they are just so understaffed that they don't have the manpower to respond to 911 calls. And our 911 response times in California are severely lacking. They are much longer than the national averages or the averages they're supposed to be hitting. But Governor Newsom knows that those points could be made, and so he uses the CDC data. And the CDC data actually records based on what the cause of death was. And so whenever there's a death in California, you can look at the cause of that death. And even if it wasn't reported as a crime, the incident that led to the death, maybe the person wasn't caught, maybe the police don't have a report on it. If it was something violent, like a gunshot or otherwise, it will be reported as a homicide. So according to the CDC data, California's most recently reported homicide rate is for 2023, and it's a reported 5.1 per 100,000 people. So Newsom is claiming that this is much lower than several other states across the country that are more conservative than California. First up is Texas. Texas has a reported homicide rate of 7.1 per 100,000 people in the same year from CDC. So obviously, just on the facts alone, 7.1 is higher than 5.1. But let's just point out some of the reporting that was done. Governor Newsom's office is touting that Texas's homicide rate is 140% higher than California's. Now, that's incorrect because if you do the math, it is actually only 39% higher. So it's not quite as drastic as he is making it sound. And I don't know if Governor Newsom or his office doesn't understand how percentages work, because you could say that Texas's homicide rate is 139% of California's, and then that would put it at the 7.1. But if you say it's 140% higher, it places us at 12.24, which is wildly inaccurate because 12.24 is different than the 7.1 that it is. So all of that to say, it is higher than California's, yes, but it is not 140% higher. And so already we're seeing that there's a little bit of distortion in how data is being represented. And so we need to ask some deeper questions. Let's next look at Florida. Florida's homicide rate was 6.5 per 100,000. This is 27% higher than California's. So again, it is higher, but it's lower than what Newsom is reporting, which he says it is 130% higher. So again, totally messing with percentages there. That is not accurate. That makes it sound absolutely wild in terms of what Florida's homicide rate would be. In reality, it's 27% higher. Then there's Ohio that has a homicide rate of 8 per 100,000. And so again, it is 57% higher. Governor Newsom is reporting 160% higher. So difference there. For Tennessee, the homicide rate was 11.4. That's 123% higher than California, which is much higher, and we are going to get into in a little bit. It is still lower than what Newsom is reporting at 220%. So I just don't know where he's getting these percentages from. And lastly, we'll just look at Arkansas. The homicide rate is very much similar to Tennessee, 11.3. So again, it's about 121% higher than California. On and on it goes with all of the cities that Newsom is pointing out. And so again, the main point I'm making here by pointing out the data is that There are states with higher homicide rates, and so we do need to deal with that, which we'll get to in a minute. But even just on the point of how Newsom is presenting this to the people, they're pretty inflated and exaggerated, and that's because he's trying to make a really inflammatory claim that all of these Republican-led states actually have these drastically higher homicide rates. In some cases, they're a lot higher. Tennessee and Arkansas's homicide rates are a lot higher. They're over double what California's is. Some of them, not so much. Texas and Florida, not quite as drastic as he's making it sound. Now, maybe listening to Newsom's exaggerations of these homicide rates is driving you a bit crazy, but the good news is that with today's sponsor, Connected Care, you can stay sane in an insane world. Connected Care is an online therapy platform that is focused on doing exactly what its name says, on connecting patients with the care that they need and helping providers in providing that care to their clientele. Their mission is to make quality mental health care more accessible and affordable to anyone who needs help, whether it be that you are struggling with anxiety, depression, California politics, just anything that you're going through in life. So if you're seeking support, Connected Care has a wide network of compassionate and licensed professionals who are here to walk you through whatever you're facing. And on the flip side, if you are a professional, then Connected Care also has your back. They want to help with more of the administrative functions like billing, insurance, all of those things that can just cause you to feel so burnt out when really you just want to connect with people and to help them walk through the things that they're facing in life. And another note for patients, if medication is part of your care plan, then they have licensed healthcare professionals who can help you walk through that aspect as well with care and attentiveness along the way. So whether you are someone who is looking for help in mental health or you are someone who provides mental health services, Connected Care is the perfect place to start from the comfort of your own home. Check them out today. See more of what they do by going to www.connectedcareinc.com. That's connectedcareinc.com. Because no one should have to navigate mental health care alone. And thankfully, with Connected Care, you don't have to. All right, so putting Gavin Newsom's exaggeration of the data and the homicide rates aside, the question still stands. Why is it that some of these Republican-governed states actually do have substantially higher homicide rates than a state like California? Is Gavin Newsom correct to assert that his governance leads to a safer state versus Republican or conservative governance, which the president, the Trump administration would actually support and say is the right approach to take nationwide? Well, to no one's surprise, there is one very important piece of context that is being left out of this discussion of California's rates versus other states' rates, and that is the topic of city governance. So while Gavin Newsom mentions that there are certain states that have Republican governors, he fails to mention that those Republican-led states have major cities that contribute to the homicide rates that are actually run by Democrat mayors. And those mayors take much of the same approach that he takes in terms of policies and crime stances. So let's take an example. Let's look at Tennessee. Tennessee is the pretty classic example when it comes to conservative state. Many people have left California for Tennessee in recent years. We even saw that in last week's episode of even In-N-Out, and the heiress of In-N-Out is moving her family from California to Tennessee. So it's seen as a pretty traditional Republican or conservative state. And yet we see that the homicide rate is nearly double. I think it's over double of what California's is. So once again, Gavin Newsom wants to make the point. Tennessee's governance is worse than California's, because if it was better than California's, then Tennessee would have a lower homicide rate than our state does. But I just want to point out the two largest contributors to the homicide rate in Tennessee are Nashville and Memphis. And those are the two largest cities in the state, but they also make up most of the homicide rates. So in the case of Nashville, since 1963, every single mayor elected for office in the city has been a Democrat. So this is not a Republican stronghold. Even though it's in a traditionally conservative state, as a city, it actually has been governed by liberal-leaning or Democrat mayors for most of its history. That means that for the past 62 years, that is not a short or insignificant amount of time. For the past 62 years, it has not had necessarily conservative policies in place. It has had more liberal policies in place. And this is shown by the fact that it is often criticized by conservatives for adopting reduced prosecution and lenient sentencing policies. This is something that California is very familiar with, and so it really mirrors some of the things that Gavin Newsom has done. Additionally, it also has pursued bail reform. This is another thing that California is really big on, and so there are reduced bail requirements for nonviolent offenses, and ultimately we see that this does encourage repeat offenders, which sounds familiar to us who live here in Los Angeles. The same pattern is true in Memphis. Memphis has also been predominantly governed by Democratic mayors who enact, again, these similar policies. It specifically has seen increases in juvenile offenses, which actually rose by 37% just in the 2 years between 2021 and 2023. And that leads many to question the effectiveness of the juvenile rehabilitation and diversion policies that have been put in place in the city. And yet these crimes still continue to go up in that demographic. So, with all of that in mind, what percentage of the homicide rate is contributed to by these major cities? Nashville and Memphis make up 50 to 60% of the homicides in all of the state of Tennessee. That is huge. Memphis alone accounts for more than 40% of the state's murders. Nashville contributes another 12 to 18% depending on the year. And if you removed these two cities from the state, then Tennessee's homicide rate would be much lower than California's. So that means if you look at the areas in Tennessee that are actually governed by Republicans who Governor Newsom is trying to slam, then you would see that their cities hold up. It actually would be lower than California's major cities. However, it is these two main cities that are governed by Democrats that actually are pulling up that homicide rate to be more than what California's is. And this isn't just isolated to Tennessee. In all of the states that Governor Newsom has called out and the ones that I have listed, they all have the similar pattern where the majority of their homicide rate is being contributed to by large cities in their state that ironically or unironically are run by Democrat mayors. So let's look at Florida. Florida is another very traditional conservative state. Didn't used to always be like that, but now it is seen as a stronghold for conservatives. And yet its homicide rate is a little bit more than California's. Well, if you look at Jacksonville, Florida, it contributes to 30% of the state's homicides. And once again, it has a long history of predominantly having Democratic mayors. So if you just go down the list, if you look at Arkansas, if you look at Louisiana, if you look at Missouri, they all are influenced by certain cities in their state which have Democrat governance. Arkansas has Little Rock, Louisiana has New Orleans, Missouri has both St. Louis and Kansas City, which are both Democratically run. Even a state like Texas is heavily skewed by Houston and Dallas. And the current mayor of Dallas only recently switched his political party affiliation to Republican, but for both cities, they have mostly historically been led by Democrats. So to sum this up, when you dig into the research, you find that about 80 to 90% of the top U.S. cities that contribute to the homicide and violent crime rates over the last 3 decades have been predominantly governed by Democrats. Now, I have one more point to make on this because I know what you're thinking. You are thinking, well, Tess, of course they're going to contribute to the homicide or violent crime rates because they're large cities. And so big cities have more population. And so if you look at a place like Tennessee, probably most of the population is in Memphis and Nashville, right? And so it shouldn't really be a surprise that it contributes to 60% of the homicides because after all, isn't it probably like 50 to 60% of the population? And that's a very important question because it is a trend that we see large cities contribute to more of the homicides than small cities. And that would make sense. However, I just want to point out in Tennessee's case that Memphis and Nashville actually only make up about 18% of the population. So they make up about 18% of the total state, but they contribute 60% of the homicides. That's disproportionate. And that's true in other cases as well. If we go back to the Jacksonville example in Florida, it makes up 30% of the state's homicide, but it only accounts for 4% of the state's total population. So there's clearly still a disconnect. Yes, it has higher population, but it doesn't have so much that it's directly proportional to the amount of crime that it's contributing. So clearly these big cities do have more crime per capita than the small cities or the rural areas or the suburban areas across the state. And that leads to an even deeper and even more important question, which is crime just inevitable in large cities? I mean, it seems like we're looking at all of the examples and all of the things that are skewing crime data or pulling it up in some cases are big cities. And all these big cities seem to be democratically run. And so is it just inevitable that every large city is going to have a high crime rate? And to that question, I want to say no. It is not the fact that these cities are big that makes them have high crime rates. That would be an inaccurate conclusion. It is the policies that are put into place in these cities that lead to the crime rates. And I know that because I want to point you to a prime example in our own backyard that can help prove this point to us. And that is Orange County. Orange County has a similar population to the size of the city of Los Angeles, and yet the homicide rates between LA City and Orange County are wildly different. LA City has 3.7 million people, and it has a homicide rate of 8.4 per 100,000 people. Now, Orange County has similarly 3.1 million people, so around the same size, but it has a homicide rate of just 1.7 per 100,000 people. That's insane. That's such a huge difference. Orange County is wildly safer than LA City. So what's going on? They're in the exact same location, like the same area of Southern California. They have roughly the same number of people. And so what is the difference? The biggest difference, plain and simple, is governance. Orange County is known for being conservative. Historically, it has been incredibly conservative. It's only in recent years that Democrats have started to be elected, and that's recent being as recent as 2022 through 2024. So it's like very new that Democrats are taking a little bit of control in Orange County. But before that and until then, OC is known for being really a red area of California. And I mean, if you look at specific cities within the county, if you look at Huntington Beach is known again for being a conservative stronghold. It's even known as the Magnificent Seven because those are the ones who are on their city council. They have 7 Republicans. And so it's really seen as being supportive of Donald Trump's agenda in the Trump administration. It's seen as really a safe haven for where you want to live if you want to be in California, but you want somewhere more conservative. And so the key difference here is the policies that they have on crime. They are notoriously known for being much tougher on crime. They are vastly different than how LA is, than how LA County as a whole is. They're different from the DAs here who do not prosecute crime. And so as a result, some of their cities in the county have such low homicide rates. It's insane. Huntington Beach has a homicide rate of just 0.02 per 100,000 people. And yet they align with conservative Republican agendas. So what exactly is my point with all of this? My point is that the picture that Gavin Newsom is painting, the allegations that he is making about the failure of conservative policies around crime and the success of the policies that he has championed in California is lacking a lot of context and is largely dishonest because he wants you to believe that what he champions, which has been Prop 47. We remember discussing that on the show. Prop 47 that moved a lot of the felonies down to misdemeanors and was in place in California for nearly a decade, which led to a ton of underreporting of crime and a ton of criminals just walking free. He wants you to believe that that is a more effective policy position than Prop 36, which was just passed by voters in 2024 and rolled back Prop 47. And Governor Newsom was against that. He was against rolling that back because he wants to reduce the prison population. He wants to move away from sentencing and harsh penalties. He wants to move away from actually prosecuting crime as felonies. He wants to go back to that misdemeanor categories that were originally in place in California. He wants to move to all of those policies, and he wants to convince you that those work. Because if you look across California, look how low the homicide rate is compared to states that enact the opposite of those policies. He wants to push back against Trump and say that Donald Trump is championing the wrong side of the argument and that ultimately you should be supporting him regardless of what he does, whether it's as governor for the rest of the year or in his future political endeavors. But that's just not true. Tough on crime policies reduce crime and they deter future crime. you can't get away from it. It's just a reality. And so no matter how you want to spin the data or however you want to present it, at the end of the day, when you dig deep into it, you just see a common denominator, a common pattern where wherever the sort of policies that Gavin Newsom likes are in place, there's actually a lot more crime than the type of policies in place maybe under a Chad Bianco. And so now to tie this all up, why does California get special attention? Why isn't Donald Trump going after states with high homicide rates, even if they are conservatively governed? Well, the point is that Governor Newsom doesn't disagree with the large cities in his state that have the high crime rates. So Governor Newsom isn't saying Los Angeles and San Francisco, I disagree with your approaches to crime. I think that we need to be taking a better approach, and I am going to enact laws in our state that you have to abide by in order to help tighten that up. He agrees with those. And so now the president has to get involved because he doesn't trust that California's governor is able to step in to quell a lot of that crime, especially when there are protests and very ignited and emotional things that are happening. If you look at a place like Florida, it's actually a good example of this because Ron DeSantis as governor has recently, even just last year, passed sweeping legislation that actually is very tough on crime. And so places like Jacksonville have had to start abiding by these states' actual mandates on these policies. And so he's taking a very proactive approach in trying to make sure that the state as a whole can lower its crime and homicide rates, even if he, as the governor, can't be involved in every single city. So this is just another example that California's leadership is not listening to the people's concerns. People in California are worried about crime. It is on the minds of voters. It is on the minds of just the everyday citizen who is walking around the state who wants to be able to go out at night or to go out with their families and not feel threatened, to just enjoy their beautiful city and the beautiful state that they live in. But Gavin Newsom is not listening to those concerns. He wants to spin the facts so that you can't really respond to him. He wants you to be intimidated, to look at the charts and the graphs and the posts that he makes and to say, I can't really dispute that. He's saying that Tennessee's homicide rate is higher, and it is higher. And so what do I do with that? I guess he's just correct and his leadership is better. But that's not true. It's very misleading and it's very inaccurate. So you are armed with the facts. Do not be fooled by our governor's reporting, and don't be sold that you have to disbelieve what you see with your own eyes. You can look around you and you can look at these facts with confidence to see that under Gavin Newsom's model of governance, even in other places across the country, crime does not get better. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I hope it was helpful for you as you navigate life in our state and that you even learned something new. Please spread the word and share this show with your friends, family, and fellow Californians. And I'll see you back here next week for another episode of the California Conversation.